This has got to be one for the books. If you know me, you probably know how much I love Korean food. On most days, it's probably my favorite cuisine and I can't get enough of it. I also haven't met anyone that doesn't like braised short ribs, and Galbi Jjim is just the coming together of those two things. I just love how Koreans approach the recipes, the ingredients they use, and the processes that they take to make food. This is my take on their version of braised short ribs, which is called Galbi Jjim. Koreans usually serve this for special occasions, so maybe you can make it for this holiday season. I'm starting with the star of the show, which is about 2 pounds of short ribs, and this is the English or plate cut style as opposed to the flanken cut, which Korea is also known for using. I try to find these shorter cuts because a lot of grocery stores that sell the plate cut style tend to kind of cut them long with the bone, and I find just the shorter ones are easier to cook with and work with. The first thing we're going to do is remove the impurities that come with the bones by soaking the short ribs in a bowl of cold water for at least an hour or up to like 3 hours. Just make sure you change the water with new cold water every 20 minutes to keep it safe. You'll see a lot of the cloudiness and bone fragments rising up to the top. That's what we don't want. At the same time, you can start to soak your 8 dried shiitake mushrooms in 2 cups of water. Those will need at least an hour to rehydrate as well. After an hour, I'm going to dump my drained short ribs into my Dutch oven, cover that with fresh cold water, and bring that to a boil. This is the final step in purifying the bones. You'll see a lot of the scum rise to the top. You should only need to boil this for like 5 minutes, and then you can drain it. And then once it's cool enough to handle, just rinse it under cold water and try to scrape off any remaining fragments. Rinse out that Dutch oven and we can get started on braising. I'm going to again add my short ribs to the Dutch oven, and then I'll first come in with my aromatic paste. You'll see this commonly made with a lot of Korean marinades, especially for Korean barbecue, and it's very simple to make. To my food processor, I'm just adding in about 1/3 of a large yellow onion. I trim off the bulky edges to make this because I'm going to be slicing up the rest of the onion for the braise. I also have about 10 cloves of garlic and about a 3-inch knob of ginger that I peeled. And then finally the magic ingredient, which is 1 Korean pear. You should be able to find these, especially this time of year, at your local Asian market. Mine come in packs of 3 like this, and I like to peel them and chop them up and then vacuum seal them. They last several months in the freezer. That way I can just pull them out whenever I need to for recipes like this. Anyway, once that's all in my food processor, I'm just going to whiz it up until it's a fine paste. That goes in on top of the short ribs, followed by the 2 cups of soaking water from the shiitake mushrooms. Then somewhere around 1/4 cup of soy sauce and about 2 teaspoons of sesame oil, a couple of tablespoons of dark soy sauce to give our final dish that pop of color, about 1/4 cup of mirin and 50 grams or about 1/4 cup of brown sugar, finally a couple tablespoons of corn syrup or honey, a good bit of freshly ground black pepper, and the sliced up whites from about 4 scallions. I finish with enough water to just about cover the short ribs, and then I stir that all around to distribute the ingredients. This goes over medium-high heat until it comes to a boil. You can skim off any extra scum that you see rise to the top, and then drop this down to a low simmer and it's going to start braising. Throughout the rest of the braise, we're going to add in ingredients incrementally based on their cooking time, so in the meantime we can prepare those. I have about 1.5 pounds of carrots, which my Korean market sells these really thick carrots that don't taper off like your regular grocery store ones do. Those are easier to slice evenly and they look better in the dish. I'm slicing these pretty sizably because I don't want them to melt into the sauce. They're going to be really big chunks to bite into, but they'll be softened by the time they're done. Now, Koreans don't like the sharp edges that are made from vegetables like this, so using a knife they carefully round off the edges to make it more of a round shape.
Nice job showing the camera, you prat.
I honestly don't care that much because it's going to be softened by the time we eat it, but for the sake of the video and keeping the tradition, I'm going to do a little bit of that, just trying to round it up into a semi-ball shape. I wouldn't spend too much time on this though, it can get really tedious really quick. Anyway, I also have about 1.5 pounds of Korean radish or daikon, which I'm going to wash and peel and do the same thing to. I'm going to first chop it into chunks the same size as the carrot, and then do my best to round off these edges at least a little bit. Finally, I have about 75 grams of jujubes or dried dates. These are also easily found at Asian markets in the refrigerator section. I'd say these are optional, but again, I'm doing this for tradition. They do add a bit of a fermented sweetness to the dish, which I like, but you do have to peel the pits out of these, which is again tedious. The best way I found to do that is to kind of split it in half, almost like an avocado, while leaving one part of it intact as a hinge, and then you just kind of feel your way through the date, and on the top you should start finding the stem, which leads to the pit, and it kind of sticks in there, but you can usually try to pry that out with your hands. Yeah, if you're using these, you definitely don't want to keep the pits in for the final dish. Okay, back at the braising pot, about 30 minutes into simmering, I'm going to add in the rest of the sliced yellow onion from earlier. I'd say that's about 2/3 of a large yellow onion. I'm going to keep simmering that covered but slightly opened because I do want this to reduce a bit and I want the liquid to be able to escape as steam. Another 30 minutes go by and you can see this is starting to darken and the vegetables are softening. This is where I'll add in the radish. I try to submerge those a bit even though they float, just to try to get liquid all around them. Okay, 30 more minutes later and I'm going to add in the rest of the ingredients. So that's the chopped carrots, those hydrated shiitake mushrooms, which we sliced up since then. I also have about 150 grams of roasted and peeled chestnuts, which I bought these that way, but I guess you can roast and peel them yourself if you buy them fresh. And then those pitted dates that we just peeled earlier. You could add in stuff like potatoes and celery to this if you'd like to make it more American style, but I think this is mostly what Koreans do on average. At this point, the braise has been going for about 2 hours, and I'm going to check the short ribs with a paring knife to see how tender they are. And they are getting tender, they're not really rubbery anymore, but to me the knife still has too much resistance going in. I don't want these to completely fall off the bone, but I want them to be almost to that point. As a contrast, you can see the carrots are still a little hard at this point, but the radish is about soft enough for the paring knife to go through. I'm going to keep simmering this slightly covered until those short ribs are tender enough, which for me took about 3 hours total. And you can see a couple of these bones did fall off, but that's more from inadvertent jostling. I want the meat to have a little bit of structure left on it, which is why I'm stopping here. However, I have a lot more liquid in this pot than I'd like. I want to have more of a thick, glazed consistency instead of a soupy sauce. So I'm going to carefully remove my solids from this pot, which is kind of taking a while with this slotted spoon. Wait a minute, I have one of these metal spiders. Ah, much better. And now that the solids are out, I'm going to blast this on high heat and bring it to a boil to let it reduce by more than half, maybe like 3/4 in total. And after about 5 to 10 minutes, you can see this is much thicker and my spoon can run through it. This is exactly what I want. And if you reduce it too much, you can always add more water back in. Okay, now comes time to plate, which I start with a few spoonfuls of cooked jasmine rice. And then I plate up one of these beautiful short ribs, and I try to lay around the vegetables and mushrooms and nuts really nicely to make it look pretty. You want your guests to see everything that they're going to be eating. Then I'm just going to ladle over a little bit more of that glaze just to cover it some more. And finally, for garnishes, I'm opting for some roasted sesame seeds, a handful of pine nuts because I still have some and I think they make a really good garnish, and then just some thinly sliced scallion greens. This is a beautiful and homey looking dish, a little different take on your standard American or French style braised short ribs, but I think this could be a good gateway into Korean cuisine if you or someone you know is trying to get into it. And you can leave out or substitute most of those add-ins if you don't like any of them, but the point is you have a really high quality, tender, and fatty meat that you've been waiting for a long time. I believe now is the time for the taste test. This isn't really my job, but I really love what I do. I'll go the rest of my life not eating enough Korean dishes, but I'm gonna do my best to try. This looks and smells amazing. It doesn't take much to know that you're gonna love a braised short rib, and I think this amplifies it with all the elements that go into this dish. A couple of my friends just had a baby and I wanted to cook something for them, so I thought this was the best thing to go for. The lighting's not that great, but I wanted to show you the tenderness of this short rib. Just pulling it apart with a couple of chopsticks, amazing. Just remember, you can always go too far with braising meats. Yeah, even though they're fall apart tender, you can dry out the individual strands of muscle, and no matter how much sauce you coat it in, it's still gonna have that chalky, gross texture. So just keep an eye on this stuff when you're making it. Not gonna quite get everything in one bite, but I'm really gonna try. Okay, that's pretty good. Cheers. Wow. Yeah, that is what you'd expect. Absolutely incredible. Any kind of tender meat like this, especially beef, is just gonna taste good when you braise it, even if you don't add all these flavorings to it. But there's just something about the Korean flavor profile to me that I love so much. The soy and sesame that stand out so well, and all the sweetness that Koreans love to add to their food. If you do feel like buying these dates, I feel like it does add a noticeable flavor difference, that fermented sweet flavor. And they taste pretty good when they're cooked too. And the radish is almost unrecognizable from its really firm, fresh texture. It's really good. It's really fun to pick at all the different flavor elements that we put into here. Lots of different pops of flavor, but they all blend together in that sauce that glazes everything. Like I said, this is one for the books. You really have to try this, especially if you love braised short ribs, which I think everyone should. Hopefully I get this out before Christmas, and if I do, this is a good idea to try for Christmas if you're doing it. I hope I was able to show you something about another culture today, but as always, thank you all for watching. Be blessed, and I'll see you next time. I think I need to go back to Korea very, very soon.